Today I want to talk about God as righteous judge and merciful father. And this takes us all the way back into the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, where we read about Abraham. And God comes to Abraham. God calls Abraham. Now Abraham is basically a nomad. I mean, he's living with 4 of his family members. They've already left kind of their home country, are pitching tents. They've kind of just living the life. Nothing real significant. His dad dies, and so it's just him, his wife Sarah, and his nephew Lot. And God shows up to Abraham and basically says, Abraham, I'm calling you out of this land to a land I'll show you. I will bless you. You will be a blessing to all the families of the earth, and you'll become a great nation. And what's interesting, it's not even really conditional. It's just God shows up to Abraham, and Abraham's like, okay, I'll follow God to this land where he's taking me. And so basically God kind of takes him on this journey where they start going down south towards Canaan, eventually go down south to Egypt, and again, Abraham's no awesome, righteous dude, basically prostitutes his wife out to Pharaoh because he's a coward, thinks that Pharaoh's going to take his wife, and so he says he's her sister, she's his sister, and Pharaoh ends up getting in trouble with God. God's like, you can't take her because I'll curse your house, and Pharaoh comes up to Abraham and is like, what are you doing, man? You should have just said she was your wife. I wasn't going to kill you or something. And so he blesses Abraham, gives him lots of money, possessions, and all that kind of stuff. And so Lot, Sarah, and Abraham depart from Egypt because Pharaoh's like, I don't want you around here, man. You're deceitful. You almost got me in trouble with God. So they're headed up north. They find a portion of land where they decide to settle. Unfortunately, it's not really big enough for both Lot and Abraham now that they have a lot of stuff and a lot of cattle, sheep, goats, trying to graze on the same land. And so Abraham's like, Lot, why don't you go ahead, depart from here, find yourself some land, we'll go in peace, and let's go ahead and do that. So Lot sees the land of the valley where Sodom and Gomorrah are, and he goes down there. God shows up to Abraham in the form of a man, with 2 angels on either side of him. He comes to Abraham and says, I've promised you that you're going to have descendants, become a great nation, and I'm sure you're getting kind of frustrated because it's been years now, and you have no children. And Abraham and Sarah kind of laugh at God when he says, I'm going to give you a son. And now they're old, and they're like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but like, okay, you say it's going to be done. We trust you, and we believe that you will give us a son, so that we may become a great nation. Now at this point is where we're going to pick up, and we're going to read about Sodom and Gomorrah. And in Genesis 18, chapter 16, it says, Then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. So basically what we see here is God talking out loud, kind of saying why he's doing this. Up to this point, Abraham doesn't actually know a lot about God. He doesn't recognize that God has wrath. That God has wrath against sin in the world, and that not everybody's righteous, and in fact, no one is righteous. And that's what God is about to show Abraham here. Just how blessed he is that God has chosen him to be a great and mighty nation by showing him what unrighteous merits the wrath of God. And so he says this, Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Now the question here is, why God's wrath? Why is he so against sinners? We're going to jump forward and read a healthy portion of Romans. Let me get there. Romans chapter 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds, and animals, and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than Creator. We read about God's endurance of sinners in Romans chapter 9, where he says, where Paul writes, "What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory." It wasn't that long ago, a couple months back, in the fall, we came home. Angela and I were out about, I think, getting lunch, and we came back, and as we're coming back to the house, I see this large billow of smoke coming up from right about where our apartment seems to stand. And so we're driving down Cole, and we're turning in, and we come up to our parking lot, and there's a cop there directing traffic away from our parking lot. I'm like, look, that looks like it's coming from possibly my apartment. Like, I need to get in there. And he's like, well, you'll have to park over here and walk over. So we park in the apartments next door to us, and I run over, and luckily it's not our apartment, but it was a fire just really close to our apartment, the building right next to us, and the blazes were going. There was probably 5 fire trucks, tons of firemen, and they had a hose hooked up to a fire hydrant. Now, something that we don't notice hardly at all, ever, is our fire hydrants. I mean, we probably pass them every day, but we don't really think about them. And, you know, everybody's got one on their street in case of an emergency. You know, I know where ours is now, but you don't really think about it too often. Well, in this case, they were using the fire hydrant, and this immensity of the water that was coming out of this hose is crazy. I mean, you know, it's just amazing how much water comes out of a fire hydrant hose. It's not like hooking up a backyard hose. You know, if I try to stick my hand in front of it, I'm going to get hurt. And you see it smashing up against the wall of the house, and there's mist flying in the air, and the water's just going everywhere, because the immensity of that water, the pressure behind it is so great. But you would never have an appreciation for the fire hydrant if you never saw that. Because then after that, I see a fireman go up and shut the water off just with one crank of a wrench, and it's gone. And suddenly, that fire hydrant has glory, and I see the glory of that fire hydrant. See, because glory is weightiness. It's the same thing as when a large boulder is thrown into a lake and the water splashes everywhere. That boulder has greater glory than the water. It's a greater than weightiness. And that's what the fire hydrant has, but you never know it unless it's unleashed, unless the power that pushes up against it is unleashed. And the fire hydrant is about to be unleashed for Abraham, because up to this point he hasn't realized the glory of God and the unrighteousness of the world. And so Abraham, after hearing this, kind of comes up to God and starts pleading with him. And he starts having this intercessory type prayer, and he's like, God, if there's 50 people that are righteous in the city, because he knows Lot's there. It's like, that's some of my family down there, you know, God, why would you do this? And he's like, well, I'll make a bet with him. So he says, if there's 50 righteous people in the city, God, will you spare the city? And God says, if there's 50 righteous people, I will spare Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's like, alright, well, I've been to Sodom, and they're a pretty nasty bunch. What about 40? 40 people. And God's like, if there's 40 righteous people, I will spare the city. Abraham pushes it, 30, 20, 10. If there's 10 righteous people in the city, I will not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's like, alright, there's Lot, there's his wife. He's a pretty good guy. He's kind of doing the math. Like, okay, alright, I think we're good. I think I got this. He's like, okay, deal. And what he doesn't understand is Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned, and all have fallen short of the glory of God, and that by our merit alone, none are righteousness. No one, not one. And so the story continues from there, and the angels go down to Sodom, and they meet Lot, and he's at the gate of the city, which kind of is a business, commercial, political area of the city where all the kind of transaction and trade goes down. So Lot is involved in the city. He's immersed in it. He's invested in it. And he sees these guys coming. He's like, now remember, Lot was there. Lot was one of the original 3 who were called by God when God came to Abraham. So he's seen these guys before. He knows who God is, and he recognizes them as such by faith. And he says, I recognize these guys. This is not good. What is he doing here? He invites the angels to come into his house. He says, why don't you come with me to my house for the evening? The men of Sodom were so wicked that we have a word after them, sodomy. They were so perverted that they sought after the men and said, bring them out here. Bring those angels out here who you brought into the city earlier, Lot. We want to rape them. We want to have sex with them. And Lot says, no. Here, take my daughters instead, is basically what he says. They've not known a man. They're pledged to get married, but they aren't married yet. Take them. Do with them what you want, but just don't lay a finger on these men. And the men of the city, so wicked and vile, will not have it. They're completely obsessed with having these men, these two men who are new strangers to the city, angels. I'm sure they're good-looking guys, and these guys are bent upon raping these men. And it says that old and young of the city, everyone, every male in the city had come out of their houses to do this. So it was everybody in the city. It was that perverse. It was that widespread in this city. So they tried to press up against the house, and the angels of God all along could have done this, but they blinded them. And so they kind of are like, whoa, what's just happening? All of a sudden we're all blind. Forget this. This is madness. And they leave. And so they're safe in the house for the night. And they tell Lot, you got to get out of here. We're going to destroy the city. There's none that are righteous here. Not one. But we wish to save you by mercy. And this is where we're going to pick it up. It says in 19... The men said to Lot, 19:12, the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-laws, daughters, sons, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against this people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-laws who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his son-in-laws to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. Here we have Lot being saved. But here's my question. Was Lot a righteous dude? Was he a righteous guy? Was his righteousness what saved him? No, not at all. I mean, the guy is about ready to give up his daughters to these men to do whatever they want with him. I mean, that's just messed up. I can't imagine doing something like that. Instead, he's a coward. He doesn't fully trust that these angels are capable. If they were God's angels, then they could spare themselves, and he could have had faith in that, but he didn't. And instead, he offers to give up his daughters. And he's obviously very immersed in this city. It says he lingered. He says, man, my son-in-laws, I've got a future here. They were going to marry my daughters. Now they're saying they don't want to go. They don't believe me. And he lingers. And he doubts. But what does God do? He seizes him. See, even later in the story, we read Lot gets so drunk, so passed out drunk, that he doesn't notice when his daughter is saying, who are we going to have children with? Who are we going to have children by? And they go and they sleep with him. His daughters sleep with him. He's so drunk. I mean, this is not a righteous dude. I mean, he's a sinful guy, just like the rest of us. And yet, we read in 2 Peter that the Bible says that Lot was righteous. What righteousness was this? Paul in Romans quotes Habakkuk 6:4 when he says, the just shall live by faith. See, and this is the whole thing, is that Lot was among those whom God called at the very beginning, of whom God blessed. And Lot followed God in faith. And he believed in God. Even though he was not a righteous guy, he deserved every single bit to be destroyed with every other man in that city. But it says that the angels seized him even when he lingered and gave him mercy and gave him grace. See, the story, it shows us that God is a God of wrath, but he's also a God of love. And that God still chooses to save sinners from their ungodliness, not by merit, but by grace through faith.